Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. He is a native of Loudonville, Ohio. Patrick Drouhard earned degrees in secondary education, majoring in history, and educational administration from the University of Dayton. He was a history teacher at Gnadenhutten. Did I say that correctly?
No.
Oh, now Morgan tried to tell me how to say this on our drive down to Dublin the other day. So I'll let you tell them. I was just trying to see if you were paying attention. He was a history teacher at that place in Ohio, and a high school principal and district superintendent in Cardington, Ohio. Drouhard authored the book, It Don't Look Right for the Times, The Factual History of the Holmes County Rebellion. Historian Patrick Drouhard will present an account of the biggest Civil War-era anti-draft event to occur in Ohio, authenticating his account with national archival records. In the Battle of Fort Fizzle on June 5, 1863, more than 400 Union soldiers were ordered to put down what was believed to be a rebellion of more than 600 men at a makeshift fort. And I'll let him tell you the rest, along with the proper pronunciation of that place in our state. Patrick.
Thank you very much. I made the same mistake. When I arrived in that place in 1973, I went to the local museum to volunteer my time, and I called it Gnadenhutten. And right away, it's Gnadenhutten, Tuscarawas County. So it's a mouthful. So that's the place. If you've never been there, it's a nice little museum down there also. I would acknowledge a couple people here today. I have a relative, Ken Grosswiller, showed up, and a friend, Susan Hugg, who I knew as Susan Henrick, and the retired Judge Elam over here, who I knew these people in my youth some 50 or 60 years ago and still know them. So thank them for coming today. I appreciate that. Both my parents are from Massillon, so I have a long history here. My grandparents are from here. The Grosswillers were here in the 1850s. One Grosswiller was killed in a boiler explosion down here at the paper mill, probably not more than a half a mile from here in 1879. And these are all things I discovered as I do research all the time on historical things. I do like to check a couple things when I start this program. Is there anyone named Blanchard here? Anybody related to any Blanchards? Good. I give this presentation and invariably there's a Blanchard shows up. Well, the Blanchards were there was a Blanchard convicted of, in this case we're going to talk about, and put in prison. And the Blanchards show up, and I always have to warn people to watch your wallets. You've got a descendant of a convict amongst you. But I'm actually related to the Blanchards too, so I say that in jest. Have any of you heard of Fort Fizzle? Okay, a few people. And anybody been to Holmes County? Okay, so Holmes County actually touches Stark County. On the southwest corner of Stark, you have a thin strip of land that connects with Holmes County, so you're kind of a neighboring county. Most of you think of Holmes County as, oh, we'll get down there, the Amish live down there. And they do, and it's very interesting. The eastern part of the county was heavily Amish. The Amish are now pretty much into the western part of the county too. In 1863, the Amish were all in the eastern part of the county, I think. They weren't down where this little episode took place. I always knew that somehow my family was involved in Fort Fizzle or the Holmes County Rebellion. My father, when I was probably 6 years old, he said, oh yeah, there was a fort down there that the Union Army had to come down and take the fort. Well, right away, when I hear about a fort, I was interested. You know, I was in the era of Davy Crockett and the Alamo and forts on TVs and Indians and cowboys. And he says, well, it really wasn't a fort. It was a building. And some of our ancestors were somehow involved. And so I read everything I could, but I could never get a straight story. There was a lot of folklore stuff about what took place. So eventually, in 2004, I determined that there were court cases available possibly in the National Archives in Chicago. Went there with my oldest brother and had a list of names, and we found court cases of 80 men indicted for various activities relating to the Holmes County Rebellion. And so that identified the players, and of course there was one named Pierre Drouhard there. I thought, well, that name's spelled differently than mine. I'm probably okay here, but it was the same person. Drouhard, Drouhard, Drouhard is how the name is pronounced, the French pronunciation. So found out they had a great grandfather involved. In fact, was indicted for treason in the affair. And then a year later, we went to Washington, D.C. to the National Archives, and I was able to get the military records that were kept, very detailed. So now I know who the players were, I know what the military was doing and what they were thinking, and I could write a factual history here. I published that in a book, which I have available here. They're $5 only if you're interested, no pressure. I also wrote a position paper later on called The Holmes County Rebellion of 1863, How Historians Got It Wrong. So if you become very interested in this and you would like my position paper, which further explains why historians got it wrong, I will send you that for free if you leave your email address, if you want to delve farther into it. If you don't, no problem. So this episode took place during the American Civil War in 1863. In Holmes County, and I think here I believe here in Stark County, Holmes County was heavily Democratic in politics. I mean, fervent Democrats. You know, kind of how we're divided today on Democrats and Republicans, that existed then, to the point that the Democrats there did not like the Republicans at all. The Democrats weren't worried about slavery. That wasn't a big issue. They supported the Civil War, the fight to bring the Confederacy states back into the Union. They did not care much about slavery. And everything was okay till January 1 of 1863, and that is when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, which Lincoln freed the slaves in the Confederate states, not the border states, and then the newspaper editors in Millersburg, the county seat, went crazy about political activity and condemning the Republicans, and very, very racist articles, unbelievable racist articles about blacks at that time. So just the dynamics and what was going on, it was just very, very divided. Like I say, not unlike today in our political differences. So that was the setting for this to have happened. Now, let's see if I can get my thing working here. Okay, so I made a map here of the north central, east central Ohio, and I circled several places. Of course, Massillon, where we're sitting today, and over here is Louisville. Ken grew up in Louisville. I don't know, anybody else here from Louisville? Okay, some other people. Louisville's what's your Catholic church there?
St. Louis.
St. Louis. French. Massillon is a French name. I don't remember the exact history, but it had to do with one of the kings, Louis, and Massillon got its name. Down here is a place called Calmoutier. It's a place. Anybody here been to Mount Hope? Mrs. Yoder's kitchen? All right, now we're making connections. That is where Mount Hope is, a French community called Calmoutier. And down here is a place called Glenmont, at the time in 1863 called Napoleon. These three communities, Louisville, Calmoutier, Glenmont, all tied together by French ancestors. And you would find people, a lot of them came into Calmoutier in the 1830s, and you would find family names here, you would find in Louisville. You would find down here in Glenmont. They traveled back and forth among these communities over the generations. And then, of course, some of them, some unscrupulous ones, got in trouble in Glenmont, and they came to Massillon. Let me see if I can show you. Here they are. Here you got a bunch of kids in an old car. You got men sitting on beer barrels. And here you have the Oak Cafe and a hotel, Drouhard Brothers up here. They were in trouble in Glenmont and they came up here to Massillon. How interesting. And here's some characters standing out front. They brought class to your city. Here's a deer hanging up here. I can't read what's on the sign. I wish I could. And here's a guy with a gun standing right down here on Main Street. Obviously the guy that shot the deer. Here's a policeman, so probably keeping track of everybody. And there's people in this picture that I know and I can tell you about. This guy right back here, Leo Grosswiller, my grandfather, was a barber on Tremont Street, I believe. And here he is, a couple of young guys, and then some older people, characters. And that's who we're dealing with that ties to Glenmont. Well, here they are again. This guy's name is Joe Cuno. His father's name was Anthony. He was arrested and indicted in the Fort Fizzle affair. Here he is up here in Massillon. This guy here, Alf Drouhard, Drouhard. And Alf Drouhard was my grandfather. And here is his brother, Ed Drouhard. Now, they caused some problems up here. In the 1920s, during Prohibition, these brothers owned a bar, got shut down by Prohibition, but they didn't stop selling liquor. And in fact, at one time, the agents broke into my grandfather's home. He had 100 gallons of fabricated liquor, which was probably gin. And they had all the liquor from their bar that got shut down. Was arrested probably 3 or 4 times, fined thousands of dollars. And his brother Ed also arrested several times. Now, we had to redeem our grandfathers. Actually, my grandfather did well. He came to Perrysville, Ohio, where he started a pottery with some investors from Massillon. 4 or 5 investors, they were buying up potteries. Now, I'm not talking about potteries that made dishes. I'm talking about after dinnerware pottery, meaning they made toilets. And that company flourished until about 2 years ago in Perrysville. Anybody ever seen Mansfield written on a toilet? Okay, that's Mansfield Sanitary Pottery, ties to Massillon, my grandfather and my grandmother, my dad and his uncles. Ed Drouhard ran a bar called the Pendulum and a restaurant. Anybody know Father Grechko? Okay, Father Grechko's grandfather, right there. So Father Grechko's paying a lot of penance, maybe. I say that in jest. I know Father Grechko some. I don't know him well, but I've met him. So these are some of the characters that came to Massillon from Glenmont, so that histories kind of coincide. Well, if you were standing in Loudonville, Ohio, where I grew up, on the evening of May 17th at 4 o'clock in the morning, a special train rolled into town. An engine, a tender, which held the wood, and probably 6 or 7 boxcars, a flat car with 2 cannons strapped down, lashed down to its deck, and a car to haul horses. Stopped in Loudonville. A man got off by the name of Captain Drake, took his horse to Nashville, Ohio. Something big going on. The train proceeded on to Lakeville, Ohio, which is in Wayne County, stopped there, and off of the train came 400 soldiers. I don't know if I can get that going or not. Well, anyways, you get the idea. And these guys traveled 12 miles from Lakeville to Napoleon. And then with them 2 pieces of artillery. And the people had to say, what the heck is going on? Union troops, 400 of them, 400 Union troops and 2 sections of artillery, 2 cannons, what is going on? Well, they were headed for a place called Fort Vallandigham, is what they called it. Clement Vallandigham was a Democrat during the Civil War. He was an anti-war Democrat that had went around preaching about we need to stop this war. It's 1863, and eventually gave a speech in Mount Vernon, Ohio, which is Knox County, about how we need to stop the war. They wanted to ship him to Canada. They ended up sending him south to get him out of Ohio and out of the north. He was causing problems. A key date, March 3rd, 1863. This is the middle of the Civil War, if you remember your history. The war was not going well. Lincoln could not find any leaders. He kept going through generals like crazy. Gettysburg had not yet happened. 3-year enlistments to feed the Union Army with soldiers was expiring. And so the Congress passed the U.S. Military Conscription Act of 1863. And of course, people responded, as would today. If we passed a draft today, I'm not sure where Iran's going to end up, but if we all of a sudden said we're going to put troops in Iran and they start drafting your children, people would get a little uneasy about that. In 1863, thousands of people were dying of disease, being killed in battle. So this was not a very popular thing. And so what they did, they organized counties by townships, and they sent draft enrollment officers out. And they were going to record the name of every male between the ages of 20 and 45. And you were going to be eligible for the draft, which was going to start up in July or August. So all of a sudden, people's children, their fathers, their uncles, their brothers could end up in the Union Army in harm's way. So naturally, there were issues. Popped up all over the North. In Indiana, a draft enrollment officer was killed. In Pennsylvania, they burnt down a draft enrollment officer's sawmill. Other places, they surrounded them, they took their enrollment lists, they ripped them up, they threw eggs at them. These guys were very unpopular. In Connecticut, there were issues going on. The most famous was in New York City in July of 1863. The draft riots there, and there were people killed by the military that was brought in. So that was all triggered by this Conscription Act of 1863. On June 5th of 1863, an enrollment officer down around Napoleon was assaulted just south of Glenmont. His name was Elias Robeson. He was from Loudonville. And down there, and I always kid the people from Loudonville where I grew up, where I was born, I said, yeah, a guy went down there, was causing problems in Holmes County and stirring things up. It was the draft officer. So here is Glenmont up here, of course. I don't know if you can see down in here, about 1.5 miles or 2 miles south was this home. And there were men working on this home, building a foundation. They were getting timbers ready, and the enrollment officer and his partner came up to this house. Now, if you look real, you probably can't see very well here, but there's a person in here. My brother was wearing camouflage that day. We were down trespassing. And here he is on the porch. You can't see him, checking things out in this house. And we're like, I don't like it. It's kind of a rough place down there in Glenmont. And here we are at this place looking around. And this is where it all started. Draft enrollment officer came up, started taking names. And he asked a guy named Jacob Stuber, who was a German, hey, who lives over yonder in that house over there? And Jacob Stuber said, well, you want to know that, you need to go over there and find out for yourself. Smart answer. Got into an argument. A nephew came up named Peter Stuber, threw a rock at the enrollment officer, and then threw a stick and the game was on. The Roman officers decided to get out of there. There were men in a barn nearby. Another man standing nearby named Griner pulled a pistol out and shot it in the air to scare them on further, and they left in haste. And of course, they went and reported what had happened, that they were assaulted. June 9th, 4 days later, Draft and Roman officers were assaulted in Knox County. 6 townships in Knox, 2 in Coshocton, and 2 in Licking County. Now, these areas are about 15 to 20 miles from Glenmont. So this activity, this assaults are widespread. And again, all of it, this is Holmes County, right where this was taking place. Knox, Coshocton, Licking, a place called Bladensburg. Anybody been to Bladensburg? Another place was the hotbed of all this activity, all this assaulting officers. And so that was on June 10th. And then on June 10th, the enrollment officers had been run out of Napoleon. They went back and reported to Columbus and Washington. They were tied by telegraph. They knew what was going on. They told them, go back and arrest those people. So James Drake was the provost marshal. He went down with 2 of his brothers, Paul Drake and Dan Drake, and 2 other guys, almost sound like the Earp brothers, went back to arrest these 4 men. And so they came into Lakeville, Ohio, way up north, came down through Napoleon. They followed this path down to where they're making arrests. Well, they went right past the homes of a bunch of Frenchmen that lived here. And this guy's in uniform. They knew what was going on. They knew that the military, they knew that these provost marshals came down for a reason. And when they saw them, they got organized. They communicated with each other, and they all gathered at a place here. If you're familiar with Glenmont, you're at the top of a hill. About 100 men gathered here. And the enrollment officer made their arrests. They had to go back the way they came. And they got right here, and here's 13 armed men and about 35 other men or bystanders. And they took, the enrollment officers had their prisoners. These people here took the 4 prisoners from them at gunpoint and said, get out of here, don't ever come back. Well, the enrollment officer and the provost marshal left, and they went and reported what happened. The next thing, they start at the state level, they decide they're going to send in the military. Another assault took place north and east of Glenmont. Up here in this area, we're down here is Glenmont, up here near Mount Hope. More officers assaulted. So June 17th, 1863, 400 soldiers, 20 squirrel hunters, and 2 pieces of artillery are sent to Richland Township, Napoleon. Squirrel hunters, those were a type of home guard. And they went and they then marched through Glenmont or Napoleon, and they were fired upon as they approached a ridge by 20 men, supposedly, and fired upon again, and then they set up to do battle. And that became what was the Holmes County Rebellion, that these men, they expected to find 500 men gathered at this fort. And that's because the provost marshal had spies, and he told the officers that there's 500 people up there on French Ridge. You guess who lived up on French Ridge? All the French people. And they were strung out from 5 miles east to west. They were going to bushwhack. They were not entrenched. Well, these people lived up there. So the enrollment officer and the provost marshal, they thought there was a cannon being shipped down to this area. All kind of wild stories. So the military response was to bring 400 soldiers into Glenmont or Napoleon and 2 pieces of artillery. Basically, they did nothing more than that little bit of a show of force. And, from this came the Battle of Fort Fizzle. And all these stories started cropping up. So the story was it was a major battle, and it wasn't. It was basically French farmers looking out for their fellow man. And they took prisoners away, and an overzealous provost marshal reported it as 500 people going to do battle. They brought in the military and everything else. And so all kinds of stories came out of this, and this is what I ran into when I started my research. One guy said, yeah, my ancestors, they went in the basement of their home, and they shot their guns into the dirt floor of the basement so they could reload with fresh powder getting ready for these troops. And my oldest brother said, well, they probably unloaded their muzzle-loading weapons so they weren't caught with, charged guns to not be in trouble. The others said the enrollment officer was making passes at all the women in the neighborhood. And he was bragging, I can take care of all the ladies in the neighborhood there. And that was the story. And that, just these crazy stories that came out of the folklore of it. And that is where I started doing the research. And again, as I pointed out, we went and we got the court cases for 80 men. We also got all of the military records and could pretty well prove what happened or did not happen down there near Napoleon. Now, in the end, there were some 80 men indicted for their activities in Knox County, Carroll County, Coshocton County, and the bulk of them in Holmes County. In Holmes County, near Glenmont, 40 men were indicted. 13 for treason because they were armed. And the armed men were all forced to put up money while they were in court. A guy named Laurent Blanchet, a French-speaking Swissman, had to put out $3,000. And another guy named Ringenberg, $3,000. And another guy named McMichael, $3,000. Now that's equivalent to, I think a dollar in 1860 might be worth $20 today, I looked up. So it's a lot of money. A farm might cost $500, and they were having to put up twice the value of their farm. And of course, when I researched my ancestors' records, I noticed he sold his farm in 1863 to his father who lived up in Wayne County for $1,000. And at first I thought he was afraid he was going to lose his farm. These people were all French, and they lived under conditions in France where they might lose their land if they did this kind of stuff. But it turned out he sold his farm to get $1,000 to bail himself out of jail. In the end, one man was convicted for his activities in Holmes County. There are a total of 80 men from Coshocton, Holmes, and Knox were indicted. 43 of those were indicted for their involvement on the June 5th assault of Elias Robeson, 10 in the June 10th prison rescue. One man, Laurent Blanchet, and that Blanchet is also the name Blanchard. You find it spelled both ways. He was the only one found guilty, and he was sent to prison for 6 months at the Ohio Penitentiary in Columbus. And of course, after that happened, I'll show you a picture of old Laurent, handsome young man. Eventually, the people from Napoleon area got together and began to try to get him released from prison. Some of the people he had involved, and he was eventually pardoned by Abraham Lincoln. But about 165 people signed off on a petition to get him out. The petition went to the Swiss consulate. So that's the highest level of Swiss ambassador, or whatever you want to call it, to the United States. Personally knew Lincoln and said this guy is a peaceful, unassuming Frenchman French-speaking, Swiss, and he should not be put in prison. The Secretary of State, a guy named Lyman Critchfield, the Secretary of State, Ohio, vouched for this man arrested. Lyman Critchfield, as it happened, was from Danville, about 5 miles away from Glenmont, and knew this guy. It went to the highest levels of government to get a pardon. You know, we hear about all these presidential pardons today. Well, here was one here where they tried to pardon this guy. It went to the hands of Frederick Seward. Anybody recognize the name Seward? Okay, so you're thinking of William Seward, who was instrumental in getting Alaska purchased. William Seward was Secretary of State. William Seward in 1864 was lying in bed from a buggy accident with a badly broken jaw. His son, Frederick Seward, was the acting Secretary of State. He handled the correspondence on getting Blanchett from little old Napoleon pardoned. It went through the hands of two guys named John Nicolay and John Hay. Anybody familiar with those names? Those were personal secretaries to Lincoln, young men. John Hay eventually became the Secretary of State, I believe, under McKinley or Roosevelt. John Hay was present at Lincoln's deathbed when he was assassinated. It went through a gentleman named Joseph Holt. Joseph Holt was the judge advocate for the United States, and he signed off on it. Judge Joseph Holt would be the judge in charge of the Lincoln conspiracy trial. And then it went to the Attorney General for the country, Edward Bates. So all these high-level people are talking about this guy from Napoleon, Ohio. And finally, then, the document went to Abraham Lincoln. He signed the pardon, and I'm sure that Laurent Blanchett came back to Ohio with a pardon paper signed by Abraham Lincoln. Now, I'm not sure where that very valuable piece of document is, but I'm sure it's still in existence. Somebody down in Holmes County once said about seeing that. I have no idea where it is. Now, it's interesting, the Blanchett was imprisoned, pardoned. One of his descendants, a guy whose name was Jim Blanchard, was a governor of Michigan, was a descendant of this guy right here that was imprisoned. I think his name's might have been Bob Blanchard, can't remember. But he's governor of Michigan and then appointed as an ambassador to Canada by Clinton. So, this guy's descendants did well. As far as Fort Fizzle, this is what it looked like in the 1930s. It had pretty well fallen into disrepair. In 1977, on Thanksgiving Day, my father, Warren, who was from Massillon, my late brother, Tom, was a surgeon out in Arizona, and this is me as a young man. I've been doing this a long time. This is what was left of Fort Fizzle. In 2018, some Blanchetts came from Kansas back to see their ancestors, Fort Fizzle. So this was about what was left of it. Stories of Fort Fizzle all had that there was a tunnel leading away from the fort, which I never understood the reason for a tunnel. It didn't, they couldn't go far. But supposedly there's a tunnel. So we uncovered this thing. My brother Tom is standing in the so-called tunnel. I don't believe it was a tunnel. I photographed it when I was there one time. I wouldn't go down in this. It's a hole in the ground. I wouldn't crawl in there. But with modern technology, I could take my digital camera, at least risk my arm, put down in the hole, and I took a picture. I think it was some kind of a cistern or a root cellar. And I said if there was truly a tunnel, you could probe the ground with a tile probe. You could take a backhoe. You would find a line of rocks still there. I don't think there was ever a tunnel, but that's just part of the folklore. So that's pretty much the story of the Holmes County Rebellion in Fort Fizzle. I really think Knox County was causing all the problems. And the people that were held responsible were people like my great-great-grandfather. Maybe I'm making excuses for him. This Blanchett. They were all French people, French-speaking. And they were first-generation immigrants from France. And they had possibly a great uncle that I spoke with one time said, yeah, they were told if they came from France, they wouldn't have to fight anymore when they got to the United States. And so they were under this impression, well, we don't have to be in the Union Army. Well, they probably were told, United States is a good place to live. You got a lot of freedom. They didn't probably say you'd have to fight anymore. But that's what they understood. So a lot of misconceptions about what was going on, a lot of wild stories, but that's basically what happened in the Holmes County Rebellion, Fort Fizzle. Now, I don't know if I covered everything, if I left you with more questions than I did answers, but I would try to answer any question you might have about any of this. Yes, sir?
Are you able to go back to the picture with the white car?
Yes, I am. 1 minute, please.
Canton Repository put an article about the Canton Rotary always put a new design on their Christmas card.
Yep.
The one year, the story showed the picture of this white car in front of the Case Mansion in, for a little further back, there you go.
Up.
They showed a picture of this white car in front of the Case Mansion in Canton.
Yes.
I called Al Bassetti in Canton, who's the director of the museum over there, and I thanked him. He said, for what? I said, thank you for putting a Maslin family on the front of your Canton Rotary card. He said, what are you talking about? I said, the people are from Maslin.
Yes.
How do you know that? I said, the guy's name is Al Drouhard.
Yeah.
Bar in Maslin.
Yeah.
I said, I have other pictures.
Yes.
So I went over and met with him.
Yes.
I said, here's the family in front of the state hospital.
Yes.
Here's the family playing on the railroad tracks.
Yep.
Here's the family smoking cigars in the living room.
Yep.
Here's a family with their card someplace else, and they're all saying Al Drouhard.
Right.
When they printed the card, they had the car and the Case Mansion, but no family.
Yes. I actually have a picture with the family.
Yeah.
And that is a 1908 Carter car.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And I'm not sure that it didn't have dual engines in it. Had a chain drive sprocket on the back of it.
They were proud of it. Whatever.
Yeah. Well, they were all about automobiles. They owned a 1906 REO. Now, anybody know what an REO is? A Rio. You ever hear of REO Speedwagon? If you're of that era of music, REO was Oldsmobile. And today we have REO Diamond Rio trucks. Anybody ever see a Diamond Rio? Same thing, REO. But yes, that picture is of that car. Yep. Yes, sir.
Is there any evidence that people from the South came north into Ohio to incite some of the people who were dissatisfied with, what was going on with the war?
I never heard any of that. I never read that, but I don't doubt someone did. The Confederates were coming, they were in Canada, and they were trying to introduce disease into New York City by taking blankets that had wrapped people that had smallpox.
It's also, they invaded St. Albans, was it Vermont?
Yes.
They came across, Canada was no good friends with the United States.
No, the Canada was probably neutral, but they were allowing the Confederate operatives to be there. John Wilkes Booth had been in Canada, and on various times. So, and you may know of Johnson's Island. Anybody been up around Port Clinton? There's Johnson Island. Was a prison camp for Confederate officers, and there were troops from Johnson's Island that came down into Crawford County and helped with some of these uprisings that were going on. So I don't know of any evidence that, but I'm sure they probably were. They didn't need it. They didn't need encouraged. We have in our cemetery at home one Confederate veteran buried in our cemetery in Cardington. I don't know how he got in there, but he's there. Yes. Yes.
Maybe I missed it, but why did they call it Fort Fizzle? Was it a person's name or did it fizzle out?
Excellent question. The provost marshal, James Drake, Captain James Drake, in a very end of a, that's in my paperwork here, by the way. He said, perhaps Captain James Drake summed up the entire affair best in a letter to State Provost Marshal Parrott a month after troops left Richland Township. He expressed, "I have not forgotten that I was a disbeliever in the reports that came to me from day to day that there was to be trouble in Holmes County. It came, it saw, it fizzled." And I am absolutely sure that that is where the term Fort Fizzle came from. The whole affair fizzled, but really the whole affair was what do they call that? A non-hamburger or something? When it wasn't a big thing like they try to report it was, but that's where that came from, Fort Fizzle. Anybody have French backgrounds in here? Names? Yeah, they were hanging around up there in Mount Eaton. I don't know, I didn't see any down at... I'm sorry, Calmouche. And there may have been some down in Glenmont. There may have been some on the petition to release Blanchard. I have that whole list of all those names. Other names?
Turney, Tournay.
Okay, I did not see that name in any of my research. Okay, I do not see those.
My wife's maiden name is Trudeau.
Oh, well, that's definitely French. And probably, like Canada, Trudeau. Or Gary Trudeau, the great cartoonist. It's a wonderful guy. Okay, surely French. Anybody else? Okay. What is it? Stovall?
Scovilles, Scovilles.
Okay, I don't see that one. Mine, of course, Drouhard is French. I have a Swiss-speaking Frenchman named Morin. They live down in Glenmont. I've got all kinds of French names, but these people, all of them immigrated into Calmoutier because the Burgundy Canal in France opened up, and they could get from eastern France clear to Le Havre, the port city of Le Havre, where they could jump off, travel to the United States by water, go up the Hudson River, get on the Erie Canal to Buffalo, get on Lake Erie, come down the Cuyahoga River to the Ohio Canal, clear down right here to Massillon and Canton and Janaden Hutton and all those places. So it opened up for the French people to get here that way, and probably the Swiss, a lot of Germans.
What street was the Drouhard's bar on?
Main Street, right down the street here. There's a green space and a strip mall down there. And I believe that's where the hotel was and the bar that I'm talking of. The Pendulum, I'm not sure where the Pendulum was. It might have been in that vicinity. Okay. So they ran that place was in existence, the Pendulum, till the 1960s that Ed Drouhard ran. Father.
You're looking at about like Rockne's area, but like at Lincoln Way, so like the parking lot in front of Rockne's, about where?
Yeah, it was right on Main Street. That picture right here, right on Main Street. Another day's talk would be the Prohibition era in the 1920s that I spoke of with my grandfather. I have to say this, that I don't know Margie Vogt, who wasn't here today, but there was a Mayor Vogt was in trouble during Prohibition. So is she conspicuously not here today? I hope she's listening. No, she's on vacation. So, any other questions? If you want to, yes.
I'm having trouble with all the battles that were going on in the other parts of the country.
Yes.
Big battles. How could they spare 400 men to come down there? Were those guys just not fit for fighting?
No, they were the governor's guards from Columbus. They were like National Guard. Most of them were pacifist types. In fact, one of the captains that led, the issues came from Cardington, my community. He's buried there. So these were pacifists that wouldn't serve regular army. They were issued smoothbore muskets, not nice Springfields, so not well trained.
To say you were pacifist would eliminate you from the draft?
Well, I shouldn't say they were not eliminated. They would serve at that level. I don't know if they're kind of like conscientious objectors. We didn't have them then, but they were. Maybe pacifist isn't the right word. They weren't Amish. There's another term I can't bring to mind, but they were, you know, kind of not for the war, but would serve in that capacity. Okay, I'm here to, if you want to ask me questions personally, I'll answer any questions I can. I'll let you move on if you need to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.